Hello and welcome to Life Stories. I'm Des Tong, and in today's show I'm going to be talking to the man who brought the International Jazz Festival to Birmingham and also discovered one of the world's biggest rock bands. Welcome to the Big Bear himself, Jim Simpson.
Hello, hello.
So, Jim, we'll get to those later, but I want to go right back. Where were you born?
Westminster, London.
Wow.
It wasn't so posh then, I don't think.
Did you know HRH?
I left so young, I don't think I knew anybody.
So, when you were growing up then, what made you pick the trumpet?
Louis Armstrong, really. My father came back from fighting in Egypt and in the desert at the end of the Second World War, and I'd been played lots of music by my well-meaning but totally musically untutored aunties, but we could play me Slim Whitman or Montana Slims when the white azaleas started blooming, and it didn't really do it for me.
Yeah.
And then Dad came home and took down Mahogany Hall Stomp by Lewis, and that was it. And from that moment I wanted to play trumpet.
Right.
In fact, I was 12 years old before I found out that Jack Teagarden was not my uncle.
So, I know there was a photograph of you in one of the papers, and I think you were about 18, and there you were at the side of Louis Armstrong.
Yeah, well, I was sitting on the aisle seat at the Embassy Sports Dome on Walford Road, which is now a block of houses, and not even a blue plaque saying that Louis played here. Can you believe that? And then this wonderful sound sort of came from a few feet away in my right ear, and it was Louis walking to the stage. The stage was really funny. It was called the Embassy Sports Dome, and it was a roller skating rink, and they put the stage in the middle of the room, and it revolved slowly and jerkily. So there was Tremor Young and Arville Shaw and Barney Bigard going round and round, and Louis came down the aisle and went to sleep down south, and the photograph catches me just like all trumpet players should be caught, checking out his mouthpiece. Not looking at him, just what mouthpiece is he using?
Talking about revolving stages, I remember a friend of mine worked with Eric Delaney, and Eric always used to have a drum roster that revolved, and the band used to play tricks on him and stop him with his back to the audience until they gave him a raise. But you told me this great story about that concert with Louis Armstrong.
The support act, yeah, the support act was a one-legged tap dancer called Peg Leg Bates, who was very acrobatic. He'd spin on his good foot and tap with his wooden one, and then he'd do vice versa. But and he'd do cartwheels and all sorts. Amazing.
A one-legged tap dancer.
Mm-hmm. Years later, I was talking to Humphrey Littleton about him, and Hump said he supported him, Hump's band on tour as well. So it was very sad because he'd go out. He was a very humorous dancer. It wasn't sort of po-faced. Really amused people. And he put on a great show for 20 minutes, go backstage, and Hump said he'd spend the rest of the evening weeping with pain from the friction of his leg against the stump. Yeah. So.
Oh dear. So you then got called up to the RAF.
Yes, indeed. And the 3 years. Well, I was called for 2 years, but after the first few weeks, I decided I liked it, so I signed on for an extra year. Also, it gave me a choice of trades. I got working in air traffic control, where if I'd just gone on the national service, they'd probably have me driving a truck or something. And
where did you go?
I spent most of my time in Gibraltar.
Very nice.
Which, for air traffic control point of view, was fun because there's a rock 1,421 feet high, very close to one end of the runway. The eastern end ended at the sea. The western end totally protruded into the harbour, and there was a main road to Spain across the middle of it. And every time we got any aircraft movement, landing or taking off, we had to make sure the barriers were dropped at either side of the road, which was one extra thing to remember.
And so, while you were in the RAF, I remember my dad when he was in the army. The music was very important, and there was always a band. So, did you play in the bands there?
I was in the station dance band because we had guaranteed gigs because the station had various functions. We didn't play very interesting music. But I had a jazz band as well, which we played in one of the honky-tonks on Main Street. And on Sundays we'd play on the boat that crossed the bay to Algeciras. It was quite fun when it was a bit choppy out there, because the banjo player was on a metal leg chair, and it was on a metal surface, and we keeled over a bit. It was I was pleased for many reasons, particularly that I didn't play banjo.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then when you were demobbed, I mean, you were saying that 2 weeks later it was a different world.
Well, I was the longest serving RAF person in Gibraltar at the time, because I loved it. I loved Spain so much. I just kept. Everyone was desperate to get home to their girlfriends and mum, and I kept swapping my place on the return trips with other people. So I extended my time there, and I did a radio show every Wednesday night. I played in the bands. I knew everybody. I was. At the heart of things. I went back to England to get demobbed for 2 weeks. I came back and I was an outsider. People no longer seemed to treat me as one of them. Really strange. It was a really funny feeling of isolation. So I gave up, and I went back to Spain and dallied there for a while.
I like that, dallied in Spain. I'd love to dally in Spain. It's one of my favourite countries, I have to say.
Very interesting. It was 1959. It's only 20 years after the end of the Civil War. Franco was still omnipotent, and not very pleasantly so. But it was a very interesting time, because you couldn't move for music. There's so much good music around. I mean, every time you go into a cafe or a bar, there's someone playing guitar or singing and dancing.
And their music is I think, so it's evocative. Recently I've been listening to a couple of people, a guy called Alejandro Sanz, who's taken flamenco music and he's mixed it with different cultures, and he's brought in rock, and he's brought in jazz, and he's brought in hip hop, and it's turned the whole sort of Spanish music on its head, but it's still got that beautiful core of the chords that they use, and they're so passion, that they use.
I think the sheer technique of Spanish guitar players
was amazing.
Stunning.
Yeah.
Stunning.
Yeah. Yeah, there was another band called Katama, which was three brothers, and they just did the three guitars and a cajon, and it was just absolutely incredible. That's one of the reasons I like to go over there so much. Plus the food, and the weather. So okay, so we got we've got that. Now you're into photography as well.
Well, I sort of inherited that in a way. My mother's father, my granddad, was a very keen photographer in the early days. I remember he has these wooden frames with negatives and sensitive paper on it. He'd put them out in the backyard for a couple of minutes and let the sun expose them, and he'd rush back in and process them. And my mother was a very keen photographer. She photographed everything. So and for our 21st birthday, my mother sent me the money to buy a good camera, which I could do in Gibraltar quite easily. So I was really, I had no choice in the matter. It sort of came with the territory. And when I came out of the Air Force, I was working as a photographer and as a trumpet player, and I couldn't really make a living at either. But between the two, I scuffled by it.
It's interesting that nowadays, I mean, everybody's got a camera, on their phone, but a camera in sort of, well, when I first started playing, and that was an encumbrance. It was big. You had to make a big deal about taking a camera around with you, and not many people did. So I think, I've seen some of your photographs, and they're absolutely amazing. The fact that you're there with that camera, and you've captured things that you wouldn't normally see, like backstage. They're not posed, are they? A lot of them just happened. And I think that's the amazing part of those pictures.
Yeah, I think what they're lacking are that they made up in physical effort in carrying the damn stuff around in the first place.
Yeah, but you can feel the vibe from them. You get the fact that it's happening and it's right there. That the fact that they're not posed.
Well, first it was very easy to get to folk in those days, artists, stars, that is, because there was no security particularly.
Yeah.
And if they weren't in a bad mood, they'd welcome you in. And then after that, it was just patience. If you hang around long enough with a camera in your hand, whoever you're talking to forgets you've got a camera and starts behaving in a normal fashion.
Yeah.
And that's when you get them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, we're gonna take a pause here, and when we come back, I want to talk to you about Big Bear, and also, as I mentioned before, that very, very famous rock band that I saw a photograph of the other day that really surprised me, and we'll get a bit of the background to that. So join us in the next half when we speak some more to the Big Bear himself, Jim Simpson. Welcome back to Life Stories, where I'm talking to the Big Bear himself, Jim Simpson. So, Jim, we when we left, we were talking about your photography, and then I remember you saying that you were playing in a band, you were playing trumpet, and you were doing photographs, and then you got into management, and you couldn't do it all, so you chose management.
Well, I guess I did. It wasn't deliberate. I never intended to go into management, but we had a band called Everett's Blues Hounds originally, and then Everett left and we became Blues Hounds, and we changed to Locomotive and ran the road for, throughout the 1960s. And I sort of, because I bought the van and I had to drive the van, I got sort of treated as manager. I saw myself as a band leader only. But when we started having some success, we tried 2 or 3 managers out, and they didn't work out. So the guys said to me, "Why don't you do it?" If you're see it from the other point of view, they might have been saying, "Hey, we'd like another trumpet player." So I decided to get into management. So I'd never decided to stop playing. It just without the impetus of having to go to the gig every night, it seemed less important.
Rudy's in Love, Locomotive. That's a great song. That's a great song.
Yeah, it was written by Norman Haynes, who was a singer at the time. He worked in a record store on Smethwick High Street, which imported singles, 45s, from the islands. And all the Jamaican kids would hang around, and I'd hang around on Saturdays, and we'd hear all this great music, bands like Young Growler and Jackie Me Too. And this Rudy character cropped up in lots of Jamaican songs. He was a bad boy. And he went around retributing and gun shooting and things, and Norman decided that Rudy was going to fall in love, so he wrote Rudy's in Love, and it might have been the first ska hit in this country, one of the very early ones.
And that led on, didn't it, to the formation of Big Bear Records. Did I read it right that you decided because you couldn't get a deal on it, something you'd release it yourself? Was it Rudy's Christmas or something?
Something like that, yeah. What happened was we'd had the hit. I wanted to get another record out quickly, another single, the same theme, the same sort of feel, to please the same audience. Parlophone, record label, at the time progressive music was suddenly becoming the thing, and they wanted to do something much more progressive called Mr. Armageddon as the next single, and we had a bit of a scrap about it. They won, because they would do, because they're part of EMI. But I'd got a recorded master on my hands of Rudy the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which was a bit of a Christmas spoof. So what do you do if you've got a master? I guess you set up a record company, and that's what happened. I called David Betteridge at Island Records, who tried to sign Locomotive before we signed for Parlophone, and I said, "I've got a record for you." And he said, "Well, why don't you do it on your own label?" And I said, "What's that?" he talked me through it, and we set up Big Bear. The early Big Bear stuff had Island catalogue numbers.
Right. So Big Bear, the name?
That was John Peel. At some party at which I wasn't present, he did what everyone thought was a funny impersonation of the way I walk. And he said, "Look, that's the Big Bear from Birmingham," he said. And then somebody told me about that, and I thought, wow, I like that.
Yeah, so, and it stuck ever since. And when was that? What year was that?
67-ish.
You then found a band, didn't you? Let's think. You were running Henry's Blues House, or the blues gig in the Crown.
What happened was I got evenings free, no longer playing. So I went out to hear music, and I heard this band from Lichfield called Bakerloo Blues Line, which featured Dave Clemson on guitar, who went on to be one of our top players. It was the time the blues boom was just about dead on its feet, and all the bands sort of looked the same, dressed the same, played 42-mile-long guitar solos, and were getting a bit boring. And Bakerloo weren't like that, but promoters assumed they were. So I thought we need to build up a following here. So I rented the upstairs room of a pub called The Crown on Station Street and Hill Street, and called Tuesday Nights Henry's Blues House, named after a particularly glamorous Afghan hound that lived 2 doors away, and put in Bakerloo there every week. Well, after a few weeks, we started booking other acts like Arthur Big Boy Crudup, the American bluesman who wrote That's All Right Now Mama, which was Elvis Presley's first hit. And a couple of the guys who signed on as members early on were John Michael Osborne and Anthony James Iommi, I think his name is. And after a while, they said, we've got a band called Earth, could we play the intermission? And they did, and they turned down the magnificent sum of £5, the regular intermission band's fee, probably worth about £50, £60 today, I guess. And they said, can we have a Henry's Blues House t-shirt each instead? So they did. And after a while, they said, well, I manage them. And I got to know them and liked what they were doing. So Ozzy was always, from day one, even though they weren't very set in any musical style particularly, Ozzy was always dynamic, and the band were always very together. They were very much a team band from the beginning. And I joined the team, and I took over management, and we changed the name to Black Sabbath, and that was it.
You know, I mean, so from such a small thing, you know, probably still one of the biggest rock bands in the world, aren't they?
I think it's most influential. If you're talking about heavy metal music or hard rock of any sort, I think you have to admit some debt to Black Sabbath. And if people, you know, wonder why I lurched from my jazz and blues background to Sabbath, well, all I say is listen to the early stuff. Listen to Paranoid, listen to the album Black Sabbath. It's still stunning.
So talking about jazz, you obviously from your beginnings, you know, the trumpet and that, you were into jazz. You then went on to set up the International Jazz Festival. That
was 2 decades later, yeah. 1985 was the first festival. We'd done a show in '84, sponsored by a local brewer called Mitchells and Butlers, in Camden Hill Park's Arena Theatre. 800 people came there to see a really all-star lineup of straight-ahead great British jazz players. We recorded the album for Big Bear. We had Sunday Times Jazz Album of the Year, and Malcolm Powell from Mitchells and Butlers and Stephen Carter from what was the Holiday Inn, is now the Crown Plaza, they took me out for lunch and said, why don't you do a festival? I thought, yeah, sounds a good idea, because Stephen said I could use his hotel as a base. Malcolm said we could use the M&B pubs as venues. It was all in place. So we did that, and this year we celebrated our 31st consecutive year.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And well, I know we featured some of it, some of the acts on here. Do you think jazz? We also have a guy called Alan Musson, who I know you know does
yes.
our regular thing. Do you think jazz is still as important? You know, as it's still got because it used to be quite elitist, but I think it's become more accessible now.
Well, before it was elitist, it was dance music. No,
yeah,
people, 1930s, it was it's what people danced to, and then when bebop came along, it became a little more cerebral, I suppose. I think it was elitist by then, but over the 70s and 80s, it did get very elitist. People, it didn't become much fun. It became very, very serious with half a dozen serious-looking intellectuals tugging their beards, rather than people having a glass of beer and fun and talking to girls and having a dance, which is what jazz is for. Which is really why I set up this jam session originally, from which the Jazz Festival developed. And it was great at the beginning. We had to break through that elitism barrier, but there were so many great players around. And we had Miles Davis on the festival. We had the Blues Brothers band from the film, the actual Blues Brothers band, 6 times in the festival. We had Dizzy. We had some top American players and top British and European players. There aren't so many of those around anymore. What's coming through now is that it's all started in Central and Eastern Europe. Young bands playing the old-fashioned styles, not trad jazz, thank goodness, but other areas of old-fashioned styles, and doing it well. I don't know what it is about Central and East European young musicians. They all play well, like the old Spanish guitarists used to play. They have great techniques. When they apply that technique with the correct feel to jazz, it becomes fun again, and people start to dance again. People are dancing to new swing all over again. This up and down the country, people are jitterbugging and jiving. It's lindy hopping. It's all coming back. But the kids now, I mean, you had someone on here, a guy called Remy Harris.
Yeah, fabulous.
What a player!
Fabulous.
25 years old. I understand how people got to be that good in 1940 and 1950 and 1960, but now he's got 321 million close personal Facebook friends he has to talk to every night. He's got to play all his computer games, and he's got to go to school and do what he has to do at school. How does he find time to practice and get that good?
Yeah.
But they're doing it. The kids are coming through it, and somehow they're finding time to play.
Well, Jim, we could go on forever, couldn't we? Unfortunately, time's catching up with us. So next year's festival, we look forward to that.
July 1 to 10. It's our 32nd year.
Brilliant. And I think, it's absolutely fascinating talking to you about what you've done. And we haven't even touched on your magazines and stuff like that. But long may it continue.
You're very kind.
And thank you very much for joining us. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, history@bigcentre.tv, and please give us your thoughts. But that's all from Life Stories with me, Des Tom.